This video is sponsored by Frontline Gaming and their new TO support program. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last week of competitive play and talk about what's currently winning. And we had a relatively large weekend this week, not quite the same absolute smorgasbord of results that we had last week with multiple super majors going down, but we did have several large major level events that included things like the Clutch City GT, Scorched Earth Open, and Schweinenkampen Open. And we can see the result of those as we move on to our metagame breakdown with an interesting kind of elongation of the meta, I guess. One thing that's been very obvious over the last couple of weeks is that there is a greater breadth of factions going undefeated. Now, they tend to go undefeated in smaller events. We see a lot of between 20 and 40 player GTs that end with wildly divergent results. Things like Dark Angels, Black Templars, Drukhari, Orks, all of these armies going undefeated. But when it comes to the larger super major level events, we're seeing it very much compress into a couple of factions that are competitive once an event gets to around a 6th round. It does seem like, while these factions are relatively well balanced against each other, at least in an open competition, once you get down to the ultimate expression of player skill, they tend to favor factions like Tau Empire, Necrons, and Ultramarines. And we can see that as we move on and talk about what factions are winning. Necrons with 3 undefeated results at some of the largest events of the weekend: Clutch City GT, Scorched Earth Open, and Tabletop Graz Open. Tau Empire, similarly at Scorched Earth Open, the CAG Bash 19, as well as West Midlands GT. Astra Militarum, also undefeated at Clutch City GT, and also at the relatively large Canarian Open. We saw Ultramarines take down both CAG Bash 19, as well as go undefeated at the Schweinenkampen Open. Blood Angels with 2 undefeated results at smaller events at the Kasi GT2, as well as GWC Warfare GT, and some other Space Marine factions doing well. That includes Dark Angels at the Game Night GT, Black Templars at the 6+++ GT, Drukhari winning the Bolters and Broken Hearts GT, Orks at the FM Comic-Con GT, Aeldari taking down the Southeast Siege 2 Attack of the Kin, and with a kind of a familiar composition, which is cool. Genestealer Cults actually breaking the mold a little bit here at the 6-round Schweinenkampen Open, also going undefeated alongside Ultramarines. We saw Chaos Space Marines with one of their new detachments take down the Dark Sphere February GT. These guys, I think, hit to a little bit of a whimper rather than a bang. Their new datasheets and their new detachments got a ton of discussion, however, haven't really seen the light of day except in a couple of these results, and I do wonder that if we do see a balance update to hit things like Necrons in the not-too-distant future, if we will see Chaos Space Marines and their new units come back out of the woodwork. We also saw some other results from Chaos factions that includes Death Guard at March Madness, as well as World Eaters at the Canarian Open, actually taking down that event. But with that, let's hop into the specifics of these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video has been sponsored by the Frontline Gaming Events Hub. Frontline Gaming has been a friend of the channel for a long time and puts on some of the most insane events in North American Warhammer 40k. That includes things like the Las Vegas Open, Lone Star Open, and Atlantic City Open. You can find all of their events over at events.frontlinegaming.org. But today they wanted me to talk about their new TO support program. Applications are now open for this program, which can be joined by tournament organizers around the world. Completing the application process gives you access to customized merch and prize support directly from Frontline Gaming. You can emblazon things like t-shirts, mugs, cups, and hats with your artwork or event logos to give them out to your players. Qualifying events or tournament organizers will also get access to Las Vegas Open tickets, which you can give out as prize support or use to attend the event yourself. And in addition to that, events by registered organizers will also get promotion on Frontline Gaming, as well as special offers uniquely for their attendees. You can find the application process for this new program at events.frontlinegaming.org, or follow the links on screen or in the video description. So check them out if you are a tournament organizer and looking for additional event support to run your events. Thanks again to Frontline Gaming for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the content. Now, moving on to our metagame frontrunner, Necrons. What I'm going to be doing this week is, well, I oftentimes will dig deep into some results, especially for factions with multiple undefeated, and try to get interesting or novel army compositions to discuss in the series. But what I want to do today is just jump in and discuss the lists from the largest events, because there is this compression of representation to these larger events. I think it's important to discuss what is winning with these factions at the largest GTs and exactly why that's happening. So we're going to start with Necrons from the Clutch City GT. This was a 133-player major and was won by David Hall, and in fact was not the only major level event this weekend for the faction to take down. They also took down the 114-player Scorched Earth Open. However, in this case, for the Clutch City GT, David was playing a Necron Pantheon of Woe. This is the Catan-focused attachment that gives you bonuses when you are near Catan shards. You get an AP bonus when Catan shards are nearby you. They can take damage in order to extend that range. So you're able to buff the output sort of passively of especially smaller units like Necron utility units, while relying very heavily and having support for these really, really powerful Catan shard datasheets. Now that includes a Catan shard of the Deceiver, Nightbringer, and Void Dragon. We also have a standard Transcendent Catan who in this detachment obviously gets the ability to close Deep Strike when he repositions himself. All of the Catan shards get big special additional abilities, which they pay points for in this detachment. Deceiver gets a Vect aura, an Aegis of Deceit aura to command point tax enemies nearby him. Nightbringer gets the ability to advance and charge, and Void Dragon gets an even greater ability to mess with opposing vehicles. In order to mess with stratagems, we have Imhotep the Stormlord in there to discount some stratagem usage. We have one unit of Immortals, potentially for Imhotep to hop into in the case of indirect fire killing him. Otherwise, he can die really easily to just like random Desolator squads or something if you get a little unlucky, so an Immortal squad keeps him a little bit alive. We have a Flayed One unit for infiltration, a single Locust Heavy Destroyer for some utility, plus 3 units of Tomb Blades, which are also able to scout, get some utility up in the front there. Those guys are all rocking Twin Tesla Carbines, so they can advance, shoot, and then move again. Plus, we have a pair of Ophidian Destroyers for their ability to go up into reserve and act as utility. Now, we're going to stay on this trend and move over to the Scorched Earth Open when we move to our second finishing faction here, Tau Empire. They ended up going undefeated at that event, taking second place on tiebreakers below Necrons, using a retaliation cadre list. This is the detachment that focuses very heavily on battlesuits, lets you move them again, gives them extra strength and AP when they're nearby their targets, and has a lot of primary objective control because it's able to use relatively inexpensive, highly maneuverable battlesuit units to go and mess with opponents' objectives. Now, in this case, you're running Commander Farsight, an Enforcer Commander with a Starflare Ignition System. That guy was rocking a trio of missile pods as well as a Cyclic Ion Blaster. So he's going to hop into a Fire Knife Battlesuit squad that is also equipped with missile pods. They obviously would get rerolls in the early game. And with the Enforcer Commander's ability to reposition using Starflare Ignition, they can get lines of sight to utility units or light enemy units and then clear them out early before you actually have to commit any of your big stuff like your Riptide or Broadside Battlesuits. Now, there is oftentimes a heavy focus on Crisis Battlesuits in this detachment. Jason did not necessarily go that direction, though, and the rest of the list looks a lot like a very similar list outside of a Moncad detachment or something similar. That includes a pair of individual Broadside Battlesuits with heavy rail rifles. We do have some Crisis Battlesuit support in a Star Scythe unit with Flamers. That's going to join with Commander Farsight, so we're firing a bunch of bonus AP Flamer shots that can also get +1 to wound when they're close enough. We have a Fire Knife Battlesuit team that I mentioned before. One Hammerhead gunship, that one equipped with a railgun, in addition to a single Ghost Keel battlesuit, and 3 Riptide battlesuits for long-range fire support. We then have some utility from a Pathfinder team, a Kroot Carnivore squad, as well as a pair of stealth battlesuit teams, a Vespid Stingwing unit, and a Piranha. So a lot of kind of standard Tau fare, in addition to the battlesuit theme that we get from the detachment. Using the same criteria, we'll move over to the Clutch City GT to discuss Grizzled Company Astra Militarum. This was run by Robert Moreland at the major level event. He was playing a Cadian command squad, a pair of Rokaldorn commanders, in addition to Ursula Creed. So we have Ursula Creed with a Cadian Shock Trooper unit in the battle line who can dual attach with the Cadian command squad to project her orders farther. We then have a trio of Attilan Rough Riders for some utility and a little bit of melee counterpunch in there. We have a single Cyclops Demolition Vehicle for some additional utility. It's only 25 points. It doesn't hold objectives, but what it does do is score things like engage all fronts or behind enemy lines out of strategic reserve really easily, which is nice. We have a Death Rider squad to add a little bit more of that cavalry support that can be ordered by Ursula Creed, fortunately. We have a pair of Creed combat engineers to act as early game utility with their scout moves, in addition to a bunch of armor. One Ratling squad for infiltration, but then 2 Leman Russ Vanquishers and 2 Rogaldorn battle tanks. That gives us some pretty decent utility with all of the Rough Riders and the cavalry, as well as the scouting and infiltrating infantry units. Definitely not a focus on infantry here because the rest of the army is going to be almost entirely armor. We have those 6 battle tanks, 2 Rogaldorn commanders, 2 standard Rogaldorns, plus the 2 Leman Russ, who are going to be providing the mainstay of damage and board control in this army. Now, moving on to Space Marines, and we're going to sit here for a little while. We're going to start at the Schwenenkloppen Open, which was won by Grisha Gevert, who was running Space Marines. Now, this was Ultramarine list playing in a Gladius Task Force instead of Blade of Ultramar, which is a nice change to see. It is a little bit different. Now, all the events we've discussed so far are running the chapter-approved 2025 layouts out of the tournament companion, and this one is no different, which is interesting because this is ends up being a relatively melee-focused variety of Ultramarines, which is kind of cool to see. This includes a combi weapon lieutenant with Artificer armor to keep him a little bit harder to kill. We have Marnius Calgar, Uriel Ventress, in addition to Wardens of Ultramar unit. Those guys are just incredibly difficult to kill, even without the -1 wound that you can get in Blade of Ultramar. There are just so many wounds for only 90 points, and you can run them forward and get value from them really early. It's easy to perform an action or threaten to hold an objective, lose 1 or 2 models to an entire enemy activation, and then still be able to do that the next turn, counterattack your opponent, and then use the unit again. We have an Intercessor squad, in addition to 2 units of 5 Assault Intercessors with jump packs. Those guys are going to be some additional useful utility. 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, an Incursor squad for some scouting. We do have 1 Redemptor Dreadnought and a Vindicator to hold the center of the table, in addition to a scout unit for additional utility and 2 Victrix Honor Guard squads. So we do have an attachment both for Marnius Calgar and for Uriel Ventress. Ventress is going to be able to deep strike his unit, or one of the 2 units, most likely his unit, because you don't want to keep Marnius Calgar off the table for too long. You end up losing his command point bonus when he begins off the battlefield. But that allows Ventress to rapid ingress out of deep strike and then get 2 Victrix Honor Guard units hitting your opponent somewhere around simultaneously, which can be an absolutely devastating amount of damage. Now, moving on to Blood Angels, sticking with the Space Marine theme, we're going to be talking about the Kasi GT 2.0 held down in Chile. In this case, this was won by Bruno Fajardo, who ended up taking it down with an Angelic Inheritors list. We actually talked about a very similar build to this Angelic Inheritors relatively recently that was focused on a little bit more shooting, combined arms-oriented version of Blood Angels than the Rage-fueled onslaughts that we've seen most recently, and that's super cool to see. And this is no different. In this case, we're running a trio of jump pack captains, one of them with the Blazing Icon enhancement to prevent enemies from being able to overwatch him. We also see Chief Librarian Mephiston. He's a great payoff for the character synergies in this detachment. He's already good for early game skirmishing, but just giving him the flexibility of reroll 1s to hit and wound and the ability to fall back, shoot, and charge is incredible. We have a combi weapon lieutenant in addition to the Sanguinor. For scoring, we're including a Intercessor squad for the backline, in addition to a Scout squad. We also have some pretty solid shooting that includes a Ballistus Dreadnought and a pair of Gladiator Lancers, just for self-sustaining, efficient shooting profiles. These guys all have built-in reroll effects, so you don't need any additional support from Oath of Moment, for example. We have a trio of Sanguinary Guard squads to attach in with those trio of jump pack captains. Now, one of those jump pack captains, the one with Blazing Icon, I should have mentioned before, but he was equipped with a Thunderhammer. The other 2 are equipped with Power Fists. Of the Sanguinary Guard, 1 unit is equipped with Carmine Spears, whereas the other 2 are equipped with Blades. Now, we also have an Inceptor squad that's with Plasma Exterminators, and this is really where a lot of the benefit of Oath of Moment is going to be coming from, because these guys can use Unto the Burning Skies to place into strategic reserve in the first battle rounds. You can actually 6-inch deep strike them starting at the bottom of round 1 in order to hammer enemy units, and especially things like heavy infantry. You can imagine opposing Victrix Honor Guard and other style heavy infantry units get absolutely ruined by these things. So it's a threat your opponent has to play around from the very beginning of the game. And speaking of threats your opponent has to play around, last but certainly not least is also a Desolation squad. Now, these guys don't have a ton of implicit synergy with the detachment. However, you can use Instant of Grace to choose any non-character model and turn them into a character, thereby giving them the effects of the detachment. That gives them reroll once they hit and wound. That also gives them the ability to fall back, shoot, and then also charge, and access to all of the stratagems. So if you want to be doing that, you can make these guys a little bit more reliable. You can also then target them with Shadow of Great Wings, so you can actually play them a little aggressively and use their super crack rocket launchers to both kill infantry and threaten heavier vehicles, utilizing the reroll once they hit and wounds that you get from the detachment ability, and then protecting them with an 18-inch lone operative effect on the shootback, which is cool. It is an expensive combination if you don't have a character that can join them, which the list does not do naturally. However, when it works, just like the Devastator squad we actually talked about in the previous incarnation of this style of build, these guys are able to, despite being a relatively squishy ranged platform, deal damage with both of their direct fire and indirect fire shooting consistently over the course of the game, and force your opponent to come in and engage with this list, which offsets the lack of threat range that it has in comparison to other detachments in Blood Angels like Rage Cursed Onslaught or Liberator Assault Group. Pretty cool build. Very cool to see a little bit of creativity inside these styles of Blood Angels army. Now, sticking with the Angel theme, and also speaking of creativity and list construction, we're going to move over to the Game Night 40k Grand Tournament, which was won by Philip French, running Dark Angels in a Company of Hunters detachment. This is the Ravenwing style detachment that gives you an army-wide ability to fall back, advance, and shoot. Mounted units, so Outriders, Ravenwing squads, also get the ability to shoot and charge when they advance or fall back. So this army is incredibly fast and incredibly flexible once it gets stuck in. So this includes a Bike Chaplain. He can actually join into a Ravenwing Black Knight squad. He has the ability to grant devastating wounds to your range attacks when shooting at an enemy that he chooses within 12 inches. So when you're firing these rapid fire 3-shot plasma, 2-damage plasma weapons, that guy attaching into the unit actually makes them kind of a hugely dangerous ranged platform. When you're firing 18 or so of these ranged attacks, you can expect that you're probably going to get somewhere around 3 devastating wounds naturally from them, in addition to the standard damage that you're doing. So that guy attaching into the unit is dealing 6 mortal wounds to whatever target you're shooting into, and then in addition to whatever other attacks you're using. Already, we're off to a good start. We have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for some utility, and then to round out the character selection, a trio of Ravenwing command squads, one of them with Recon Hunter to give his unit Scout. That's especially helpful if you play on terrain layouts with good cover outside your deployment zone, because the unit's very difficult to hide. However, Recon Hunter allows you to move up and hide behind things like large ruins or L terrain just outside your DZ, where normally your opponent would be able to hit you, but with that Scout, you can actually dodge it. We also have one with Master of Maneuver, which allows you to treat the battle round as being higher than it normally would be for the purposes of coming out of Strategic Reserve, which means these guys can rapid ingress in turn 1. So top or bottom of the first turn, these guys can already be on the table, advancing, shooting, and charging. Now, in the battle line, we do have an Intercessor squad to hold the back line, and then we have 3 Outrider squads. These are going to attach in with those Ravenwing command squads. That gives you a nice little 6-model package of bikers, so they're not quite as big as the 9-model Ravenwing Black Knight like hammer units that you can construct, which can be very difficult to maneuver around terrain features. The other thing is that the Outriders are base 4 wounds apiece, so as long as you keep your Apothecary alive in the unit, you can always have access to 4 wound models to respawn. You can take damage on your Ravenwing Ancient inside the unit to make use of his 4 wound characteristic if they were in a 3 wound biker unit, but the Outriders, you can just take damage on whoever you want, and then you're able to respawn those really big, hefty Outrider profiles on a huge base, which gives you tons of additional quote-unquote movement up the table when you lose models, but not lose the entire unit. The other thing is that the Outriders give you +1 strength and damage on the charge, which impacts not only the Black Knight combat weapons in the command squad themselves, but also the Ravenwing Champion, who is rocking his Mastercrafted power weapon. So he gets 6 baseline 2 damage attacks. Those goes up to 3 damage attacks on the charge. All pretty good stuff. We then also have an Incursor squad for some additional utility and to buff the guns of these various units. 2 Invader ATVs, who are also helpful utility units. They can pack a multi-melta in addition to benefiting from all of the mounted synergies that the detachment has. 2 Landspeeder Vengeances with Plasma Storm batteries to deal some long-range damage. We've been seeing a lot of these pop up in Dark Angel's armies recently just as a very, very well-rounded ranged platform for only 120 points. Incredibly fast, easy to get angles with them. The downside being, of course, that they're relatively easy to kill. We do have a Dark Shroud to try to protect them, as well as protect the bikers in the early game, so you can trail your bikes back to that Dark Shroud to provide that stealth bonus. So it's difficult to kill the entire unit, and then if you don't kill the Outrider squads, which do have a ton of hit points, then they're going to start to respawn and increase their board presence up the table. We then also have the standard unit of Ravenwing Black Knights for the Chaplain to jump into, a standard Scout Squad for utility, a Stormspeeder Hammer Strike and Thunder Strike. So when we are talking about dealing this sort of hammer blow damage with the Landspeeder Vengeances or the Black Knight unit, we can give Ignore Cover and +1 to wound, depending on what we're shooting at, in addition to a Calidus Assassin. Very cool build. There's a lot of skirmish potential from the Ravenwing command squads. They're so fast, plus getting that bonus damage means they're good into a wide variety of targets. They're not amazing at killing heavy armor. They don't have like a ton of really high strength or high AP attacks. However, any wounds that do go through from that champion are going to be hitting for 3 damage. You even have the devastating wound attacks from the Black Knights themselves, who get +1 damage on the charge from the Outriders, so they go to 2 damage. They don't have the anti-monster, anti-vehicle you get from the Black Knight squad itself, so there's a little bit of anti-synergy there. However, it is going to help pump up their damage, so they can do something. I'm not going to say that they're not doing anything, but if you hit infantry squads with them, they're going to absolutely scythe through them, and then you hope you can deal anti-armor damage with the combination of the Storm Speeders and the Landspeeder Vengeances, which together with their powers combined are going to do some insane work. Now we're going to move over and discuss that 6++ Grand Tournament in order to round out our discussion of the Space Marine faction. This one was won by Ed Watts. This event was a little bit smaller than the other ones we've talked about. 59 players, still relatively large. And it did use, importantly, WTC-style terrain layouts, which means it is a little bit more conducive to melee profiles than a chapter-approved or the GW-style layouts. Now, in this case, we were playing a Bastion task force inside the Black Templars faction, and this was very straightforward. It was focused on massive Crusader squad bricks that could use all those cool battle line synergies that Bastion task force gives you access to. It gives you access to advance and charge, gives you access to -1 to be wounded, sustained or lethal hits. It's an incredible level of support for battle line keyworded units. And the army, incredibly straightforward. We have 3 Castellans, 3 Marshals, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant in the character slot. Blades of Valor on one of those Marshals. That's going to give +1 AP to all battle line units in all battle line models in the unit, which means that going into a 20-man Crusader brick, these guys all become AP2 with their chain swords. That gets even better on the power weapons of the Sword Brethren inside the unit as well. So we have 3 Castle and Marshal combos, so they get potential hit rerolls in addition to improved critical hits. We have access to lethal or sustained hits, in addition to the sustained hits that the Crusaders already have on their profile. So we're choosing lethal hits basically every time. And then we can trigger those on the 5+ critical. So it's just a ton of damage. 2 small 5-man Assault Intercessor squads just to act as utility, in addition to a standard Intercessor squad to obsec the back objective. We can carry some of those around in a Repulsor Executioner, and we have a Scout squad for some additional scoring. Incredibly straightforward list, but it is a blunt instrument, and that blunt instrument hits like a truck. It's fast, it has that blood surge movement to mess people up. It can be relatively difficult to kill by stacking defensive stratagems together. Things like -1 to wound with go to ground potentially can actually make it kind of difficult to kill too many of these Crusaders, and it's very difficult to kill the entire Crusader unit while getting through those strats, while getting through their blood surge, in a position where you don't get hammered by the next Crusader squad down the line and killed by them too. So it's tons of forward pressure, and if the terrain is conducive to it, it can be incredibly scary. Now let's talk about some Xenos factions, and we're going to start with the Bolters and Broken Hearts GT. This was played in New Mexico, had 41 players, and was won by Adrian Lopez, who was running a Drukhari Spectacle of Spite. Now, we've talked about Spectacle of Spite quite a bit this year. I would say most of the Drukhari results from since the World Championships have been played with this detachment, although we have seen a couple of notable exceptions, and this in this case is not going to be one of those exceptions. In this case, we are running Lilith Hesperax, a Chronoshard Succubus for that fight first, in addition to a Succubus with Periaptive Torments. We have 3 Witch units to hop all of those Succubus characters into, and a pair of Raiders to deliver them to the battle. No Venoms here, though, which is interesting. We have a Chronos, 3 Hellion units, 1 unit of 5 and 2 units of 10. That's where a lot of the damage from the army is going to be coming from. We have a Mandrake unit for utility, and then a bunch of Dark Lance equipped units. That includes 3 heavy weapon Scourge units plus a Ravager for a total of 15 Dark Lances for dedicated anti-tank to go with the solid anti-infantry that we get from the Witch units themselves. In addition to that, tons of Reavers, 2 units of 3, as well as a unit of 6 Reavers that are going to be dealing some damage with Heat Lances and acting as additional utility. Pretty straightforward stuff from the Spectacle of Spite, but it's nice to see Drukhari going undefeated. Now we're moving over to Fargo, North Dakota to talk about the FM Comic-Con. This was a much smaller event, but it did see Orcs taking first place. Jeremy Scadger going undefeated with a green tide at that event. This is the Horde detachment that gives boys units access to a permanent invulnerable save that we actually saw do fairly well at the major level Winter Ruin event from Derek Abshay from 40k Dirtbags relatively recently, earlier this month. In this case, we were running Ghazghkull Thraka, a pain boy with bloodthirsty belligerent to give reroll advance rolls for the unit and reroll charge rolls. He can dual attach with Ghazghkull, so you get the regeneration for the unit, but also some additional movement from that combo with Ghazghkull himself. We have another Pain Boy for another one of the units, in addition to 2 War Bosses to hop in. A Weird Boy, he usually jumps into one of the 10-man squads to use Tide of Muscle in the late game. He can redeploy himself, and because you have 10 models, a reroll on that charge as well, which allows him to pretty efficiently deliver that unit into your opponent's backline and grab their objectives. We have Zodgrod Wartsnaga in addition to a big unit of 22 Gretchen to act as an additional super scary jail threat. So between the Ghazghkull Thraka unit that's relatively fast with those reroll advance and charges, in addition to the Gretchen, you can walk really early and potentially hit your opponent with 2 of those big bricks and just lock them into their deployment zone and then threaten the same thing the subsequent turn with additional boys units, either with the Weird Boy or with the War Bosses being delivered. And a lot of the actual damage doesn't come from the boys themselves, although you do have a competitive streak to give you reroll wounds, so you can find damage with them. They are largely AP1. However, the War Bosses and Ghazghkull Thraka in the units are going to be basically chain slung shot from the boys' combat maneuvers to actually deal a lot of the damage there. We then have a Battle Wagon, which can basically constrain the size on the battlefield of one of these boys' squads down to a smaller proportion in order to allow them to occupy space more efficiently and then disembark and charge later. We have Aggression Squad for the back objective, in addition to a Commander Squad and a Storm Boys unit for utility, plus 1 Truck unit, which can deliver another one of the smaller 10-man boys squads. Now, moving on from there, we're going to head on over to Ireland for the Southeast Siege 2 Attack of the Kin, which was won by Colin Power running Aeldari. Been a little while since we've seen a very classic Aeldari build, and in this case, it was an Aspect Host, and a very straightforward one at that. This includes Azurman, Janezar, and Lycus, with attachments for all 3 of those Phoenix Lords. We have Dire Avengers for Azurman, a Howling Banshee squad for Janezar, and one of the Swooping Hawk units for Lycus, one of those equipped with a Power Blade array rather than a Spinneret rifle on their Exarch to make use of her improved lethal hits with a very impressive 10 melee attack profile. Now, we have a Wave Serpent for the Dire Avengers to hop into. It's not using the Falcon combo to give them wound rerolls, but they are just going to be able to jump out, deal some damage to enemy infantry, and then hop back into that Wave Serpent over and over and over again with their own version of Fire and Fade. We then have a pair of Ranger units and a trio of Swooping Hawk units, in addition to 2 additional Warp Spider units, 5 model Warp Spiders with Spinneret rifles for utility. We have a little bit of damage amp from a Warwalker to improve the AP characteristic by 1, and then a lot of the long-range damage from this army is coming from a trio of Fire Prisms. Those are going to be able to act relatively independently. We can target one to a particularly tough enemy target, potentially amp its AP in order to get through 2+ saves with the Warwalkers, and then fire all the Fire Prisms through the linked fire mode to fire 4 total 6 damage shots with baked-in rerolls as well that are relatively high efficiency, and then use the just incredible skirmishing prowess of Eldar armies to deal with your opponent's infantry and utility units while you hammer them down with the Fire Prisms. Now, it is not the easiest list in the world to play, especially with a Wave Serpent and 3 Fire Prisms. It's very difficult to maneuver those around the table, but if you're able to do so, you can get consistent good damage from the backline with the Fire Prisms, in addition to just using Eldar's ability to passively score and clear infantry incredibly well. Now from there, we're going to move back over to the Schoenenkloppen Open, which not only saw Ultramarines winning it, but it saw an interesting faction in second place, also undefeated. That was Christian Brewer running a Biosanctic Broodsurge Genestealer cult. Now, we've seen a lot of Biosanctic Broodsurge recently. This isn't going to be breaking hugely new ground. However, it's always cool to see these detachments do well, especially at larger level events. They are very difficult to play. However, when you can consistently get your engagements off and you can play the combat game incredibly well, this list can do insane things. This includes 3 Abominants, one with Predatory Instincts for infiltration, one with Alien Majesty. We also have a Biophagus, as well as a Patriarch with Biomorph Adaptation for additional strength and damage, and a Reductus Saboteur. A lot of what this army is going to be doing is slingshotting those characters like the Patriarch and the Abominants into particularly powerful enemy units in order to get those insane melee attacks off on them. We have effects like bonuses to charge from the detachment, extra attacks, as well as 6-inch Pylon Consolidate that can try to activate that. We have 2 Acolyte Hybrid units, 3 Aberrant units to join with the Abominants, in addition to some backline shooting from Achilles Ridge Runners. Oftentimes we see these guys cut for additional melee in this particular detachment, but in this case we are going to be using them for some additional damage output. That's 1 Achilles Ridge Runner with a Heavy Mortar and a Survey Augur to give Ignore Cover. So he can ping a target, give +1 AP, give Ignore Cover, and then the other two units of 2 Achilles Ridge Runners, so 4 total Achilles Ridge Runners, can fire Heavy Mining Lasers at it at AP3 for D6 +1 damage. They go to AP4, Ignore Cover, so it ends up being a lot. We have a Goliath Truck, a hybrid metamorph unit that's going to attach the Biophagus to get all the benefits of the detachment ability, in addition to another unit of 5 hybrid metamorphs just for some additional trading, plus a unit of 5 Pure Strain Genestealers for some early game aggression, and a unit of 10 that can attach with the Patriarch to slingshot him into particular targets and try to 2-for-1 with the unit. A thing I like about this particular build, there's also a Goliath Truck in here to try to deliver some of these Acolyte and Metamorph hybrids. One thing I like about this is that it does have a lot of ability to interact with your opponent early. Achilles Ridge Runners have scouts, they have long-range weapons, so if your opponent is trying very hard to prevent you from getting in with screens, which can be problematic for the army, it doesn't really have any way to close deep strike. It's going to deep strike at 9 inches and then try to hit those 9-inch charges by stacking charge bonuses on itself. However, if you're screened, you're just hitting the screen at that point and you're trading down. So the Ridge Runners can allow you to hold your reserves longer and clear out those screening units without having to dedicate any of the melee. And then once you get to late Battle Round 2, Battle Round 3, you start to be able to get these melee threats into the heart of your opponent's army and really start to engage those juicy targets with the characters, which is where a lot of the damage comes from. So cool to see a little bit more of a combined arms build from Genestealer cults with this one. Now with that, let's move over to the Dark Sphere February GT and talk about some Chaos factions. This is a 49-player GT being held in the United Kingdom, and in this case, it was won by Nikhil Talwar, which is a great name. I would name my Chaos Warband leader that. And in this case, Nikhil was running the brand new Huron's Marauders detachment. This is the new detachment for Chaos Space Marines that allows you to choose either to give +1 to hit to all your infantry, just full stop, you all get +1 to hit, or you can fall back, shoot, and charge. However, if Huron can see you, you are inspired by the baleful gaze of your pirate captain, and you're able to do both. Absolutely on point flavor for the detachment ability. Now, beyond being infantry, there isn't any keyword restrictions on the +1 to hit effect, and you're basically going to be adding +1 to hit in the entire time. And unlike Renegade Warbands, the other new detachment that Chaos Space Marines got, you still get the benefit of Dark Pacts while you're doing all this stuff. So if you have Dark Pact payoffs, you can work them alongside each other, in addition to the fact that you're going to be stacking +1 to hit with sustained hits or lethal from that ability. So the output of this army is incredibly consistent from its infantry units, and it works on units like Damned Squads, which this list is using in massive numbers. So we are running Cypher, Fabius Bile, Huron Blackheart, as well as a pair of Dark Communes. We have the Masters of the Maelstrom. These guys can dual attach, they can embed into a chosen unit, and then also get Huron into that unit. And the nice thing here is that this detachment has auto 6 advances using the stratagem Seize the Prize, in addition to having the ability to advance and charge, which means that if you have chosen units, those guys are able to advance and charge naturally, and you can stack that with someone else advancing and charging on the same turn to get multiple units, this massive, huge boost of threat range. Not to mention the fact they're all going to get +1 to hit once they get into melee. And you can, for just 1 command point, auto 6 advance any of those units that are naturally advancing and charging to save yourself a little bit on the cost there. So in this case, we're running those 2 chosen units who are going to naturally advance and charge. One of them gets Fabius Bile, one of them gets the combination of the Masters of the Maelstrom and Huron Blackheart all together. We then also have a pair of Accursed Cultist units to join in with the Dark Communes. Now, the Accursed Cultists will already get +1 to hit when they are benefiting from their Dark Ritual, so they don't necessarily need the +1 to hit that you get from the detachment ability, although if they live past their Dark Ritual turn, then they're going to be able to benefit from that +1 to hit later on, which is nice. So that's something, I guess. But the other thing is that these guys also naturally advance and charge. So we have the ability to advance and charge anything that we need to, including the Possessed unit that's in the army as well. There's a unit of 10 Possessed. Those guys are going to be able to push up the table using the stratagem, and then we can auto 6 any of the other units that are advancing and charging. So we can advance and charge essentially this entire army when we need to. And then it hits like a truck when it gets there. We have a pair of Chaos Biker units. Those guys are going to be acting as a little bit of utility, in addition to the 20 chosen, in addition to the 32 Accursed Cultists, in addition to the 10 Possessed. Extremely straightforward list. This feels a little bit like a Creations of Bile army. However, it does get the benefit of that very consistent +1 to hit, in addition to stratagems like +1 attack from Reaver's Flurry, and some additional utility, things like up-down from Encircling Surge, as well as the ability to Blood Surge your extremely tough units of Chosen. The Chosen have damage blanks or respawns from the Masters of the Maelstrom or from Fabius Bile, and they're already kind of difficult to kill units. 30 wounds plus the attached characters in those units is a lot. Being able to surge those guys and give them those bonus attacks, in addition to their incredible speed in this attachment, makes them hugely scary opponents. Now, heading on over to Indonesia for March Madness, Indonesia's 3rd GT and WCW qualifier. This is a 34-player event and was won by Jensen Go, who is running Death Guard. Now, a very standard Death Guard build, but it's cool to see a little bit of Indonesian representation on the show. This included a Demon Prince of Nurgle with Revolting Regeneration. We are in a Virulent Victorium detachment, in addition to a Lord of Contagion and Mortarion. Mortarion's a nice inclusion here alongside units like Death Shroud Terminators, because he's able to rapid ingress in early and then get access to Contagions in the front line. You can keep him in reserve in addition to the Death Shroud, and then ingress him and then run up to your opponent's front line, drop the Death Shroud Terminators, and essentially charge a second thing with Mortarion, hit with both Mortarion and the DST on the same turn, and that's very difficult for a lot of armies to contend with. It's just a huge brick of Death Guard slop on your engaging your front line. Speaking of which, we do have a 6-man unit of Death Shroud Terminators to go with the Lord of Contagion. We have a bunch of Bloat Drones and Blight Haulers for the backline. That includes a unit of, 3 individual Heavy Blight Launcher Bloat Drones, plus a Flesh Mower Bloat Drone, with the melee profile, plus 1 Myphitic Blood Heiler for anti-tank, in addition to a War Dog Stalker for some additional anti-tank, which is cool. He's also high OC, which is nice to act as a disruption piece and take objectives from your opponent. We then have 40 Poxwalkers, 2 units of 10 for some early game OBSEC in the midboard, and then a unit of 20 to hold down your backline. The nice thing about the unit of 20 is that it also fizzles any Cull the Horde draws your opponent might get. So while your army does give up things like Bring It Down pretty easily with lots of Bloat Drones in the backline that they can kill with shooting, being able to deny that easy secondary, at least in the early game, is very helpful. Now, last and certainly not least, we're going to move over to the 53-player Canarian Open, which was played in Spain. In this case, this was won by Marcos Socram Mejias, who won it with a Berserker Warband from World Eaters. In this case, Marcos was running Engron, Karn the Betrayer, a Master of Executions, in addition to 1 Slaughterbound with Berserker Glaive. No other enhancements on any of these other characters. We have a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers for Karn to hop in with, a Chaos Rhino to transit those guys to the battlefield, in addition to 2 Chaos Spawn and a Jekyll unit for some utility, 1 8-bound and 1 Exalted 8-bound for some additional early game trading pieces. And then the rest of the list is actually just vehicles. We have a Forge Fiends, pair of Forge Fiends, with Ectoplasma Cannon cannons, very good against heavy infantry. Nice to have a little bit of ranged support here, especially behind Angron, pushing forward early. If you're able to get Angron engaged in the early game, being able to essentially force your opponent to deal with him with their anti-tank shooting, that means the rest of your vehicles can basically move forward relatively unmolested. It's difficult for you to lose Angron and more than one additional vehicle in the same turn, which lets the Forge Fiends kind of play in the Sprinkler. And speaking of which, we also have 2 Hellbrutes for some additional Sprinkler play. Kind of cool to see a more vehicle and monster-focused version of the army. A lot of these Berserker Warbands have been 30 Khorne Berserker builds for the last couple of months, and this one is definitely putting a lot more focus on those little walkers, which is cool. But with that, those are all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite, and huge thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks as well to our sponsor, Frontline Gaming. Check them out in the links in the video description, especially if you are a tournament organizer. Big thanks to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, or Twitch subscribers. All you people are incredible and amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.